Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. We are so excited today to be talking to Lee Murray and Dave Jeffery, who have an anthology that is out now in the UK, but here in the US it comes out October 14th called Beyond and Within This Way Lies Madness. Welcome, Lee and Dave, to the show.
Thank you for having us. It's
Yes, thank
fantastic to
you.
be here.
Yeah, so Lee, you are in New Zealand, correct?
That's right.
And
Yes, I'm an Aotearoa.
yes, awesome. And Dave, you're in the UK.
I am indeed in a place called Bromsgrove in
Very cool. So,
We're in sunny York, Pennsylvania.
yeah, we're in oddly summer-like
Lovely.
York, Pennsylvania, so it's like 80 some degrees Fahrenheit here, so it's very hot and humid. So it doesn't feel like fall, but we have all the decorations out and everything, so we're just running with it anyway. So, but we're very excited to talk about this anthology. I think, we talked a little bit, Lee, before we started recording here of just how vital it is to talk about mental health in general and the way that it's tied to horror for so long, in many ways, sort of damaging stereotypes. And I love that sort of the message and the goal of this anthology is to sort of reverse some of those things and talk about them, in a little bit more positive a light and more realistic. So I just wanted to get the background of where this came from and how it came to be.
It goes back to, I'd say, about 2019. And I wrote a piece for the Horror Writers Association. It was a conversational essay called Out of the Darkness. It was just Lee and I just having this chat about the state of affairs of the horror genre, and uh, how it was portraying mental illness, mental health, and we kind of thought that we could, as a community, we could do better in terms of how we serve, um, I guess, people who endure mental health and mental illness issues on a day-to-day basis. Certainly in terms of the portrayal of those tropes within the horror genre. My background is I worked for about 35 years in the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, where I was a mental health practitioner. So I kind of worked with people who endured and survived mental illness on a day-to-day basis for 35 years. Excuse me. And so I kind of got to see, I guess, firsthand, really, the realities of living with a mental illness. And when we started to look at how mental illness was portrayed on screen or in literature, especially within the horror community, we thought we needed to do better in terms of lessening those stereotypes. So we had that conversation, and then we started to move into what we could actually do in terms of making this tangible, how we could do that. So Lee and I, Lee, is it fair to say you wrote me into the Horror Writers
Press
Association?
ganged Dave into. We should do more, Dave. How can we do it? I think that's kind of how it happened. I agree. I press ganged you. I'm sorry, Dave.
Look, I feel like I've been roped into far worse things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So Lee invited me to join the wellness committee, and
Mhm.
we agreed that we were going to co-chair the wellness committee within the Horror Writers Association. And we had a 3-year tenure with the Horror Writers Association. And during that time, we were the architects of their mental health initiative. And what that basically meant was it was introduce the concepts that we've just talked about, but also provide, I guess, a suite of information and platforms within the organisation to not only help writers in terms of change their perceptions and perhaps their approach to how they portrayed mental illness within their work, but also looked at how writers used their craft in order to manage their own mental health issues. And that kind of came to the fore as we started to take the mental health initiative onto the road, so to speak, in terms of conventions like the Horror Writers, Stoker Con, British Fantasy Society, Fantasy Con, where we had platforms, we had panels, and basically tested the water about what was going on out there with the readership and creatives within the genre as well. And incredible, we had an incredible response from both parties. Would you agree with that, Lou?
Gosh, absolutely. Yes, I don't think I could have embarked on this journey without Dave. You know, he did just mention that he's had this extensive experience in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, because I don't have any of that sort of therapeutic or understanding of the sort of those sort of medical issues, which is not the role of this particular our initiative or anything. We're not talking about therapy. We're talking about how we can improve the portrayals of mental illness in horror in a way that is sensitive and authentic. But just Dave's experience with advocacy in this area really just gave me some confidence. My own background is that I struggle with anxiety and depression myself, and I think I'm probably quite neurospicy as well, since both my children are, and but I haven't gone down that track. So you know, and but also an award-winning editor, and so you know, just bringing the two of us together, we and also and I guess some work ethic. You know, we're both a couple of workhorses, I think, and so you know, it's just a brilliant partnership. um, and then we started on this mental health initiative for the Horror Writers Association, not really knowing kind of where it would go. We felt there was a need, and we understood that people were sort of clamoring for this kind of content, sort of, how do I improve my craft? How do I, you know, what kind of techniques can I use? What sort of themes work? And also, you know, this is why I do it. You know, when I'm writing and I can put something on the page, then, you know, I feel better. I've got it off my chest, and people can see this is me and understand. And so, you know, so we did understand that there was sort of a need, but we did not understand the extent of the need, and how much people would just be, you know, so excited about this project, and by extension the anthology. And I mentioned earlier, before Dave got in the room, that the open call for This Way Lies Madness attracted 1,400 entries, 1,400 stories. With very few exceptions, all of them could have been in this book.
Yeah. Wow.
So there really, it was very difficult to make a decision. And but yeah, so that's kind of how it came about. And then we were sort of absolutely thrilled when Flame Tree came on board and said, yes, we agree, there's this massive gap in the market, and there's a need for work of this nature. And you know, all the time, hopefully we'll just progress and there'll be more of it, and that people will pick up the book, and you know, they'll be able to say, you know, look, I've read this and there's a story in here and it's like my experience, and give it to family members or other people and say, look, if you read this book, if you read this story in particular, you'll understand how I feel. This is exactly my experience, you know, wrapped in metaphor. So we're just hoping, and we'll see how that goes. But yes, it's been in a nutshell, it's been a bit of a snowball. Dave and I kind of said, put our hands up and said, okay, we'll have a go. We'll see where this goes. And then it's become its own monster, hasn't it, Dave? It's been wonderful.
I find myself shouting avalanche on a regular basis.
Incoming.
Well, that makes me think, you know, hearing both of your experiences, you know, it really makes me think about how probably when, Dave, you started in this field and where we're at now, and how different, you know, mental health is talked about, you know. And obviously we're also talking about three different countries as we talk here today, and how it's perceived. And I know there's differences there too. But, you know, when looking at these stories, I especially think about by Freddie Bonfante,
Yes.
this idea that, like, you know, when I was a kid, and I'm sure when you guys were too, to be neurodivergent, you know, it just wasn't allowed. Like, you just couldn't do it. You know, it's like you had to fit in. It's like, you figure it out. We're not going to try to figure out, you know, what's going on differently, or change anything about what's going on for that. So, like, it's that's really sort of a theme across, you know, a lot of the stories, but that one really popped out at me, of this idea that, you know, it was so normal to just suffer through with whatever it was that was going on.
I mean, that is a wonderful story. I mean, in terms of when we read that, I mean, they're all wonderful stories. But I guess, as Lee said, we had such a volume of submissions, really. We really did want to we wanted to distill it down to its core essence of having mental health issues discussed in a kind of metaphoric way,
Mhm.
metaphorical way. And I think Freddie's very much kind of hit us within that context of almost a vampiric story,
Mhm.
um, but again, that heavy metaphor for a desperate parent who is, I guess, doing their best for their child despite, the challenges that are being faced there. And I guess within that context, we're seeing a kind of renaissance that as a healthcare professional back in the 80s we were crying out for, where mental health was at the forefront of discussions, and things like the I guess the neurodivergent context had very different names and labels back then. And I
Mhm.
think this is where I guess the changes are. It's about looking at trying to navigate the labels that are thrown at people in order to fit them into various boxes within the medical profession. Now, bearing in my mind, I'm not bashing the medical profession.
Right.
I've worked within it for a significant period of time, and to a point, I can understand why there is a need to do that in terms of diagnosis and that kind of thing, in terms of applying a scientific approach to try and remedy some of these challenges. However, even back in the day when I was working in the 80s, when I first started, mid 80s, uh, the labels that have been around for a significant period of time were just being lobbed at people within the same context. We were always trying to say, well, a person
Yeah.
uh, isn't defined by the label that you ascribe to them. In fact, they're kicking against that. What they want to be recognised as a person. There is a person here that we're talking about. And when we start to look at within the context of when creatives are writing about different types of mental illness or mental health issues, traditionally what they've gone for is the label. So they'll go for the label and then they'll reel off a load of signs and symptoms and behaviours from the diagnostic manual, and that becomes their research. And what we're saying is that may well inform your research in terms of getting the context and the background correct, but never forget that there is a person in all this, and it is the
Mm.
person that you need to be writing about. So that's what we've hoped we've done within the context of This Way Lies Madness, is we give creatives a resource so that they can go to, where they can see exemplar stories if they're unsure about how to start writing about mental illness and want to do it properly, they want to do it with sensitivity, then they're going to go to this book and see clear examples of what that looks like in the real world.
I love the idea that
Yeah.
it's both within itself a very entertaining and well written, all that kind of stuff,
Mm,
something that you're looking for in an anthology of short stories for entertainment, but then also that it can be almost like a library like resource to say, okay, I know that I have this idea that I'm kicking around that has, sort of some of these themes. This is where I can go to look for sort of how I can frame that within, a sensitive and accurate and, realistic context. That's really interesting.
I was just gonna
Yeah.
say that recently I was applying for a lot of jobs, and I feel like there's a lot of great things that have come from the way that the world has accepted neurodivergence and whatnot. But there's this new part where you fill out for the job, and it'll have like 30 different, like pretty horrendous diseases. Like, do you spontaneously bleed on the spot? Or, do you have this crippling whatever? And then I'd be like, and do you have ADHD? And it's like, do you want to declare that you have a disability? Do you not have a disability, or do you wish to not answer? And I'm like, why are all these things lumped together? Like, I don't see how they, you know,
How they affect your ability to do the job,
but
or
yeah,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, I also don't think that, like, I don't know, let's say like having like sickle cell anemia or something, that you're, or just like some of the things they list is crazy, and then it's like, and then, you're neurodivergent. It's like, I never personally see it as a disability. Like, in the first place, I guess is what I'm saying, is
Mm.
like, no, you're lucky you're getting me with some
Being able to,
neurodiverse
yeah,
things. It's like, shouldn't this be listed under like a superhero or
yeah,
like
a strength.
a strength? Yeah. So I was just,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, is this a catch 22? Like, do I declare that I have
Yeah,
it? Do I
it's like,
not? Do I
what
say,
if I
no, I
say
don't
yes,
wish
but
to
I
answer.
don't have a
But
disability?
because
Like,
it's linked to like 30 different other things that you can't label which one it is, it's like,
yeah,
no, no, no. Like this one's a good, like, I don't, it's just, I still think that there's work that
even
needs to
though,
be
yeah, it's
done.
still
That's what
being
I mean.
stigma.
That's the point. Yes.
Yeah. I think David said it really well when he said there's an individual behind all this,
Hmm.
you know, and also part of the story. So for me, when I read Freddie's story, and I just want to say that Freddie's primarily a filmmaker, and I think I'm correct in saying that this is his first short story, isn't it,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Dave? And so, wow, fantastic,
Yeah,
like a really and he's a visual storyteller. So, oh my goodness, he brought the horror. But I think as a parent, I read this and it resonated for me as a parent of neurodiverse children, adult children now. That whole, the isolation, the stigmatize, the stigma, because, fairly early on, neurodiversity was a problem in parenting. You were just a bad parent, right? And you're just desperate to help your child navigate the world. And so this story, with its isolation and its social construct, the social prejudice, really, and this is all couched in metaphor. It's beautifully done, this, but it so resonated for me, and that, so that just hit the spot. And I think that's true of all of these stories, and particularly this one, that labeling. Straight away,
yeah,
as soon as you've got the label, then
right.
everyone thinks they know what the situation is, and
Hmm.
how. And it's so much better, broader than that. And I think when we talk about, the individual behind it, and all of our writers have really brought this, is that they've got into the head of the person with the mental illness, or the person caregiving, or the person who's as close as possible to that person who's suffering the mental illness. And they've given us that internal thought, that really close perspective, which gets us inside and helps us understand really, all of these issues around the mental illness. And it's just so powerful. We're just carried along with the narrative, and the understanding and the compassion and the solace that it brings is. I read Freddie's story and I went, oh my gosh, yes, I get this. I've lived this. I understand this, and they're not. Thing is too that so often in film, and I wonder, I'm so excited that Freddie is a filmmaker, so he get this, and because internal thought is very hard to do in film. In
Hmm.
literature, we can really get inside our characters, but in film, you have to sort of imply it.
Right.
But I really just I just love that he got this. Oh, I've lost my train of thought. I'm getting too excited about the story and remembering the story, but it's a wonderful story. And I'm glad you picked that one out as one to discuss, because it is fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was wondering, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more with different stories too. When in the process of, putting these together, did you decide that they were going to each have the author's note at the end, kind of talking about it? Because I almost found myself just as excited to read that author's note as the stories themselves, because they just frame them, and really, as Dave, you were saying that this is going to be like a resource, like especially those, and understanding, what it is, because you get it as you're reading it, but there is a lot of metaphor and subtlety. So when you read that author's note, it like just opens your mind even further to say, well, I see that now. So I really wanted to hear where that came from, why you put it in, and when you decided that was going to be.
That was from the get-go, wasn't
Yeah,
it, Dave?
well,
We
yeah,
just
cool stuff.
understood that it's you're none of this is in isolation. It's to do with society, and the whole context is vital to understanding. Yeah, so we always knew we were going to do those vignettes, but boy, do they bring some power to those
Mm.
stories. They just give us that extra insight that is just gives you frisons, doesn't it?
Well, I thought Lee and myself have had these discussions, behind the scenes, really. But some of the self disclosure, some of the lived experience that the writers have brought to those vignettes are so incredibly brave to be able to write. about your own lived experience, either as a mental health survivor or a carer or just a witness in all these things, putting so much of yourself, exposing so much of yourself on the page. That level of vulnerability, as editors, we felt incredibly humbled that people felt that they were able to do that. Uh, and I guess when it comes to deciding on stories and what have you, uh, it became incredibly I guess Liam and myself were quite, and I'm sure they will support this. It became incredibly difficult. We became very aware of how when you're saying to when you're sending out emails at the end of the process to say I'm sorry you've not made the final table of contents. We were very aware that a lot of the stories, some if not all, were sent with some element of lived experience
Mm.
within those tales. So the last thing we wanted to do was because it's bad enough as a writer to get that rejection letter, but when you feel that you've sent a story where you've given a piece of yourself to it, and that you get that rejection letter through, Liam and myself were really conscious about the impact that could have, which is why we were very mindful about making sure that the email reflected that. Would you agree with that, Lee? When we sent an
Oh,
email out,
totally, totally. There were stories that didn't make it onto our table of contents that, made me cry,
Mm.
with the brutality and the beauty of them, really. Yeah, to bring your lived experience is such a, um, it's such a courageous act. Even the act of writing is subversive and
Right.
courageous, but actually bringing something of, so visceral and so vital to yourself and exposing that, it was hugely courageous. So as David said, we spent a lot of time crafting those rejection letters I wanted to write to everybody, but also to acknowledge that we read every single story.
Yeah, we did.
That we didn't have slush readers reading them. David and I read and absorbed and acknowledged every single story that was sent. We didn't half read them, or we read them all, because we felt that people were sending their experiences and they must have known there was a good chance they wouldn't get accepted. We only had certain number of spaces.
Mhm.
Um, which is this constraint of obviously of an anthology, but
Right.
we wanted to acknowledge that their work, their courage, really, in putting these stories out there and putting their experiences on the page, albeit couched in metaphor and story, because it just, and because of this avalanche, and because that we wanted them to feel seen, even if their story is not seen in our anthology. We wanted them to feel seen, because they had been brave enough to put those pieces.
I mean, that's the nicest, most respectful, because it's your work that you put so much into. Like, anytime you're making a story or writing anything, you're birthing like something, but this is a level of personal and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And to have that opportunity to just understand why I wasn't selected, but my work was still valuable and that it was personally read, it's just, I wish there was more things like that. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I'm sure, that's really, that's what you hope for. I'm sure as any writer that's sending something for that. I know that there's going to be people hearing that or that are very happy to hear that. I think that as you talk about, you know, that and sort of this lived experience, I think especially of the Secret Angels of Regret, that story, Jonathan Mayberry, like that story in itself is horrifying. Like there's so many things going on there. But then I read the author's note and his lived experience and
Mm,
what he says there just completely changed, um, and brought so much more depth to it, and it made it even more horrifying. Like this idea that it's like, okay, like this person that was so close to me and really abused my whole family would look at this story and feel the exact opposite that I do about it. And like understanding that, it just, it like broke my heart all over again.
yeah.
It's a powerful piece to read,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes. And also couched in a little bit of humor.
Right,
which I
yeah.
don't know how Jonathan does that. He's
I
an incredible writer.
especially, in these times, like, the social media, this idea of, like, the initial really horrible thing that he does with, the credit collectors. You can just see that happening, like, right now so much, especially
Mhm.
in current events. Like, it's like he nails it so well.
Yeah. Absolutely, and, that whole diabolical scientist sort
Yeah.
of aspect of it, and of course, when we're talking about mental illness, the science is often, adjacent, isn't it? Because we are, tapping into the medical community, trying to get support for people. So this was rather interesting, taking that corporate view and that sort of very, very diabolical, that very rigid personality and abusive personality.
Yeah.
And Jonathan he really brought it. We were very excited to get this story, but quite different from many of the others. With that, because it is so horrific,
Mhm.
and so unbelievable in a sense.
Yeah.
Who could do this?
Right.
And yet it happens. That's the thing that's crazy, is that of course who would do this, but of course it happens. And to couch it in that hint of humor, which just lightens it and allows us to enter the material and enter this topic, because humor is so very, very well aligned with horror. We
Yes.
need that lightness in order to enter such dreadfully difficult topic.
Yeah, and sometimes it
And
just, like, even highlights it more when you have that sort of
Mhm.
juxtaposition of the humor.
I'm thinking about that book, Model Home by Rivers
Solomon?
Solomon, and that is a very deep, heavy, mental health loaded, but some of the funniest scenes that I was, like, literally tearing up laughing,
Yeah.
um, but it's not a funny book.
No, it actually brings more
It
power to
no.
the
does,
other
yes.
parts when you have that humor.
Yes, I think he understood that well. And of course, and as you say, those vignettes at the end of each story sort of just they give a different perspective when you understand that Jonathan kind of lived that,
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, just incredibly insightful.
Yes. Another story I wanted to, touch on, um, that's probably gonna be near and dear and really hit hard for a lot of readers is the story that opens the anthology, TBR by Kaylee Dobbs, which is really just on its own is brilliant. There's again that humor or that feeling that so many different readers feel. There's that meme going around that reading and collecting books are two different
Mm.
hobbies, but like um so metaphorically it's really clever, but then again when you get to that author's note and you think about this in terms of human relationship and dynamic, it takes on a much darker turn but then also is also so relatable for people that have had relationships like she describes here. It's fantastic.
I mean, I'm sure Lee will support this as well. But Kaylee's story was one of the first that was selected purely on it was just the wow factor. In
Hmm.
terms of if you are ever going to get a shining example of me hitting the brief of a submission to this particular, that absolutely hit the bullseye. It was absolutely exactly what we were asking for. And at some point, Lee and myself, we were talking about, are we articulating our vision clearly enough so that people are going to get this. So it was like kind of, I guess what's the word? It was kind of affirming that
Yeah.
we had given we had asked for we'd asked the right questions in the brief when Kaylee's came and hit the desk, and I read it and I said to Lee, "Oh, just have a look at this," and it was like, "Oh wow, this is
Yeah, it
amazing."
was kind of a shoo-in, which we shouldn't say because it was very difficult. I mean, when you put together an anthology, there are stories that it could have been in the anthology that aren't, and simply because we think we're going to put this one in because we need, there's a vampire story or there's already something about, a Poe type story or whatever. And so, but this one there was going to be nothing like it. So we kind of knew, because it was so unique, we just knew, okay, this is a shoo-in. This is one. We're going to have this one because nothing like this is going to come in at all. It was just so unique.
Yeah.
So we were lucky in that sense. And she does it just beautifully. And for me, I kind of, when I read the vignette, I went, oh, because I sort of read it as a rejection dysmorphia type
Mhm.
situation,
Right.
whereas it's more of a relationship gaslighting type of abuse type of thing. And so, again, here our reader brings their own perspective to a story and their own history and their own understanding. And so I read it as particularly rejection dysmorphia and coping with, always being pushed, always not being good enough, that not being
Mhm.
good enough thing. And so the fact that you could read it in more than one way, I mean, because Dave saw it as Kaylee presented it. And I think that gave the story some strength as well. Again, she brings the humor. It's such an unusual concept. So yes, she really did bring the humor, and she just knows that milieu so well. Kaylee is a podcaster and a book talker, and so she totally understood that concept of not being uh, that rejection, that abuse. It was beautifully powerful and a perfect way to open the book because um, although it's not as graphic as some of the other stories, and because this is horror, we can do that. But it's a nice step into the book to see just what we're all about. So we were very pleased to pick that one.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where it'll be really interesting as people read that story, and I'm sure, people are now because it is out in different parts of the world. Not that you're gonna pick a side, but what side people are more, sort of sensitive to or understanding, the book or the owner, So I
Yeah,
just think it brings, so many different, thoughts up as you're reading it because it's like, you can see it's like, oh, it's just not the time and that kind of stuff. And then on the other side, it's like, then why are you keeping me here? At the same time. And it's so interesting, to kind of think of that as a human relationship and the way that people are, it's like, I love you, go away. I love you, go away. Like that kind of like
yeah,
feeling
yeah,
that people have so many times and why then that comes about. And that's why I loved especially her little author's note talking about the relationship where both of them had similar traumas and how they kind of went so many such different ways with how they processed it and how they treated people after it.
yeah. That's so powerful. That note. It's so powerful to give you that extra understanding of that story. And not an easy thing to write those vignettes. Then they weren't easy, and I don't think we made any changes to vignettes.
Mm.
Really, they
No.
came as they were because they were so personal.
Right. I think it's
Yeah,
amazing that the authors, were willing to just do that, so much. It shows how much they trusted you guys and also how much they understood how important this could be too. So that's wonderful.
yeah. No, we were very grateful and very lucky, actually, that authors were on board with this because it wasn't easy. And I know there was one author that said, "I need to be careful how I do this because I don't want to hurt the person that this story is about." So
Mm,
that it's not. It wasn't trivial. It wasn't a trivial thing
yeah.
at all.
No, I love that. And so I'm a big fan of Emily Ruth Verona's first novel, Midnight on Beacon Street, which is a very sort of fun, messing with time, and you kind of know something's going to happen at this time and all that kind of stuff. But I was not prepared for her story in the slightest. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. And then I'm like, oh my God, like this goes there. And it is so powerful, but it definitely I kinda had to stop a couple times and say, "Okay, all right, let's get back into this now. I've taken a breath."
If you look at Kaylee's quite quiet, nuanced, subtle introduction,
Mhm.
and yet you've got the same caliber and quality of writing in Emily's, in as far as but that nuance and that introspection, and yet the delivery of the actual imagery that she puts in your mind about what's happening in front of that mirror is
Mhm.
absolutely jaw dropping. I was literally wincing
Yeah.
as these things are happening, and I think that is the joy of the anthology, where you can have stories that certainly start to impinge upon what you could simply call extreme horror, yet ensconced within a very delicate kind of introspective presentation. Because while all these hideous things that the protagonist in that story is doing to herself in the name of changing her perception of herself,
Mhm.
there's the inner monologue about rationalizing her mindset, why she's doing this or why she feels she has to do this. And that's very much what we wanted to try and capture within these stories when we were trying to, I guess, put it together, because it could have gone quite easy down another route. If this had been in any other kind of book, there would be potential where the emphasis would have been on just these elements of self-mutilation.
Mhm.
Whereas what we were talking about is what drove an individual to do that to themselves, which makes it a totally different story, both for the reader and I guess the creative as well. Because if someone's looking to explore things about body dysmorphia, about self-mutilation, how do you get into that headspace? What is it you want to do? Because what we saw within that story was, whilst the events themselves were very visceral, it was done in such an expertly crafted way. It was beautifully written, beautifully crafted as a story. So as a writer who's wanting to write about those kind of issues, that would be an absolute go-to story to try and look at how you unpick how to write material like that. And again, I just thought it was just an incredible piece of work. Incredible piece of work.
Yeah, Adam, I have a copy of Midnight on Beacon Street that Emily actually signed in person for me. So I just want to put that out there. I was already a fan of hers.
Yeah.
And so it was wonderful to have her submission came in. She wasn't one of our invited guests. And she brought a submission to us, which was just wonderful. I was so excited when you saw the caliber of some of the names that actually submitted. And so it was wonderful to get Emily's story. And it was one of the first, I think it came in the first round of submissions. So we had quite a long open call, I think 3 months. And Emily's might have come in the first week. And that was brilliant because Dave and I knew straight away, well, okay, look at this incredibly powerful story. And it kind of became a little bit of a benchmark for the
Mm.
rest of the stories, which kind of wasn't very fair because Emily is a fantastic writer. But it did tell us, okay, we're on the right track. We knew straight away that we were going to get what we needed, that we had put the brief out in a way that people understood what we were looking for. And one of the things I think about Emily's story was that, and this is something, by the way, that Emily didn't see herself, and is the way it mirrors Poe, in that descent into madness is entirely in the head of the character, and you just so expertly managed and crafted, as Dave said, and it's a really great example if you are a writer and you are looking to see what techniques do we use to create a story where you get it, that this person, it could be diabolical in some ways, it's seen on the face of it, you think, why would anyone do that?
Mhm.
But in the internal thought of the character and the understanding of the backstory and the whys and the way it's written so closely in that character's perspective, that it perfectly makes sense, which is so interesting, isn't it? That for anyone with mental illness, it's not like they're intrinsically evil, but sometimes the things they do, the behaviors may be inexplicable to us. And that's where this story was so beautiful, because we totally got why the character would go there. We totally understood it, made perfect sense in the moment. It's not that behavior seems so wrong, so not right, and yet for the character it makes perfect sense. And so that understanding is just extremely powerful. And yeah, it's a favorite story of both of ours. I mean, we love all of the
Right.
stories, but this one really captures that very Poe type of writing. And again, as I say, Emily said, "Really?" When
Yeah.
I spoke to her about it, she said, "Really? What?" And so she sort of went back and said, "Oh, I see what you mean." And because it is so very cleverly crafted to be so deeply in the perspective of the character. And so any writers who are looking to do something Poe-esque definitely recommend having a look at the story, just for the level of crafting, which is
Mm.
so beautifully done.
Yeah, it really feels like it's almost this, like, not a dual narrative, but the internal and the external. It's like two stories are happening at the same time. It's what you're viscerally experiencing, and then her, inner monologue. And it doesn't change that what viscerally is happening is just painful to read, but it does. You're like, in a, cheaper stories that have had maybe similar things happening, it is all about the shock value. But what makes the story so good is how much you understand this character, and that just brings a level of sadness to the horror of what physically is happening.
Yeah, but also I think for a lot of women that, self-identification, you get it, and,
Mm,
there's a you just feel seen. Again, that feeling seen, that here's someone who knows how I'm feeling and
yeah,
why, when you see, how much sort of body dysmorphia there is, and, people starving themselves and using all sorts of remedies to try and be some ideal that is just not realistic.
yeah. And
Yeah,
how
that
that,
self that
instead of
yeah,
getting better, it's almost getting worse. You would think, a lot of
exactly.
other things people have kind of exposed, but, as social media just continues and continues, and image is more and more and more important, I think this is one area where it's like, we're not doing better with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to Grace Chan's story, The Mark, which another just such a powerful story that explores, like, how all of these authors in, 20 pages or whatever it is or less, that a lot of them are, explore so many different themes. But this one really, I thought, captured a lot of different things, because it's the trad wife, like the idea of what a wife is supposed to be, the racism that she deals with, both from her husband and her employer, but then also the feeling that I think a lot of people have, especially over the last 10 years, of this person that maybe I love and have lived with has been replaced in some way, and is this really even the person that I've always loved and been with?
Is this the same timeline? Is this the
Yeah.
same person?
Well, it's just like, I forget what the name of the syndrome that she says here, that she's kind of talking about, but like, this is not a human being anymore. This is not my husband. It's such a fascinating concept, and so timely right now.
Well, it's like the thing from, I always go back to Men in Black, where the very first one, where the alien comes down,
Yeah.
eats her husband. He comes back inside, and when interviewed, she's like, I know Edgar, and that's not Edgar.
Mm-hmm.
It's like his skin was falling off his bones, and he's like, it
Wearing
was
an
like
yeah.
someone was wearing an Edgar suit. And I feel like that's captured in this story here of like, okay, for all intents and purposes, this looks like the human being on the outside, but it's not anything that you know and are familiar with, and they're gone.
Like it kind of gave me like a kind of Stepford
Yes.
vibe when I was reading it. It's a beautiful story, and it does raise, I guess, so many issues about this concept of uh, a dissociative mind, and trying to understand what's going on when your worldview is starting to become undone. Trying to understand your place in what is reality and what isn't, and trying to make sense of that. I really kind of got those kind of messages when I was reading that story, and that kind of how it ends as well. It's like kind of, it just leaves you with that sense of total chill about what she's done to her husband in the end. Is like, has she uncovered something that was there all the time, or has she done something horrendous?
Mm.
driven by
Mm.
her belief systems. And I think for me, it's just a really satisfying story from beginning to end.
Yes, that lovely twist at the end. I think for me with Grace's story, and Grace, I'd worked with Grace before, so it was a real privilege to work with her again. And this particular story, for me, is kind of that look at the sort of cultural underpinnings of
Mhm.
mental illness as well. I'm a third generation Chinese New Zealander. Grace is a Chinese Australian. Actually, in her real life, she is a psychiatrist,
Mm.
and so she brought this extra insight into her writing. But I felt to me that in Asian cultures, for example, mental health is just simply not addressed. It's just ignored. It's pushed to the side, just a little bit like women's issues. So this became a whole sort of gaslighting, abuse as well, type of story as well for me. So it was. I think this one really resonated for me for that sort of underpinning, that cultural underpinning. I happen to be married to a white person as well, not abusive, but so but I can see how it happens. There's this when you have this disconnect, cultural disconnect as well. And so for me there was this powerful underpinning. A lot of mental illness is related to displacement and isolation and lack of connection and denial and isolation. I think probably when you're talking about mental illness, isolation and misunderstanding are some of the biggest issues. Can you cope? Well, yeah, I could cope all right if I wasn't so isolated, and that lack of connection. So this one really stood out for me for those particular themes, and it is beautifully written and so clever,
Yes.
just subtle and very dark, even though it's not one of those lots of blood horror, but it is very dark in the subtlety of it. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, and I love in her author's note when she talks about that it's not a hopeless story, that actually there is a taking back of agency and, channeling the anger and rage in ways that maybe you wouldn't do it like in the story. But the idea that, when you kind of realize these things are going on around you and take that agency back for yourself, that there can be some hope found in that idea there too.
Absolutely, yes.
Yep. Love that. Um, Obviously, Alma Katsu was the one that connected us, and her story in this anthology is excellent as well. And this idea,
We love her.
yes, yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, we all love her. She's fabulous.
Um, and so I was very obviously excited to read all of them, but her story, since she is the one that kind of made the connection, I was like, "Ooh, I can't, especially want to read that." But man, the way that she connects, the vampire and the things that are going on, in this story, I think that kind of Renfield character and, has been throughout, since Dracula and all those things, and the way that she deconstructs and adds so much more to those kind of ideas is just so fascinating here. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Do you want me to
Go
do
ahead, Dave. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead, Dave.
These long silences, like who's going to speak first? I mean, for me, I love this story because um, the I think the essence of I guess the vampire being not necessarily the vampire, but certainly the vampire's assistant is
Mhm,
kind of the personification of someone who's struggling with addiction
mhm.
and how they try to work their way through that by becoming an assistant to an incredible monster. So it's like
Yeah.
kind of struggling with one horrific set of circumstances in their life and just replacing them with something even worse in the hope that it's going to be somehow better was a dynamic that really fascinated me with this story. And I was really torn with the protagonist. I'm not too sure whether he is or isn't a protagonist. He
Mhm.
could be an antagonist. He's got a very ambivalent role within the story itself, and I just loved that ambiguity. I love stories that are, I guess, philosophically ambiguous, and this certainly struck a chord with me when I was reading it. And again, the ending is just sublime, really, from a horror
Yeah.
perspective. It's just fantastic.
Mhm.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that we've got two vampire stories because we all the metaphors are different, but
Yes.
this is the second vampire story in the collection. I think those are definitely the only two, but interesting how different these two takes are if you consider Freddie Bonfanti's work, which was
Mhm.
much more empathetic and well, no, I don't know. They're both empathetic, but they're quite different stories. They're not the same take at all. And you think, okay, well, it's vampires. It's not. They're as far apart as you can imagine. Those two stories.
Yeah.
But of course, Alma brings her experience and her way of crafting a story, which just kind of, brings you in. And she uses the plot. So she's very clever like that. So we're in the character's head for sure. But she also has these twists and turns of the plot, which is quite hard to do in order to show that stepwise progression into addiction
Mm.
and that temptation, that just irrepressible sort of need, which so many people who suffer from addiction, and it is just so debilitating, and yet they can't see that in the moment, and so Alma is so very clever the way she does this, and I think anyway, people reading this, I'm hoping people on that track, who might not see that in themselves may read this story and perhaps see it, but also caregivers and family members understanding how this happens. How can you just be living your life and suddenly end up in this place, this really bottom pit of a place. And so it's such a powerful story. We were so excited to get, and actually, to be honest, Alma wrote us two and we got a choice. So we were very, very lucky.
Okay.
Yes. So, so she felt very strongly about the topic as well, and definitely wanted to bring something that was of value to this anthology. So she gave us two stories, and we did choose this one, even though we also chose two vampire stories. But I do love the way I think vampires, for some reason, have a really wonderful way of, that metaphor of something, hooking on to us and just sucking the life out of us really does really resonate in terms of mental illness. So yeah, no, we're super excited to get the story. It's an incredible one of the longest stories in the anthology as well, but you don't know it because Alma has the skill of just carrying
Yeah.
you along with her plots.
It moves
Yeah.
for sure. Real. Yeah, it definitely that surprised me you just said that. I didn't even realize that was the case. I see when I look at this table of contents and the authors here, I do love how diverse, in so many different ways they are. But I wanted to touch on because, as a horror fan my whole life, seeing Ramsey Campbell's name in here just was so exciting. What is that like to work with, such a living legend in the genre?
Yeah.
We approached Ramsey to see whether he was going to, in terms of him being part of the story of the book from the outset. I think it's fair to say, Lee, that he was so excited about it. I
Yes,
think
he
he
totally
got his
was.
story to us within a fortnight.
Yeah,
Wow.
he was I think his was the first story we
It
received.
was, yeah. It was the first story we received, and I've done quite a few panels with Ramsey here in the UK, and he's quite open about his experience growing up in a family um, where mental illness really shaped the family dynamic, and
Mm,
he's very overt about that, and he's very passionate about how I guess instilling how that has impacted on him, how it's impacted upon his writing, and he's very candid in panels. And we did, as part of the um, Horror Writers Association's mental health initiative that we mentioned, God, it seems like a while ago now, but when we were talking about it, we launched a few panels at various conventions, and Ramsey sat in on one of the ones that I moderated and told his lived experience of that. So from that kind of point, Lee and I, we thought we really needed to have Ramsey involved in some way because of his Not necessarily his legendary status. It
Yeah.
was more about his lived experience within the subject matter. I think not
Passion
having
for it.
having in a book like this would be remiss.
Yes, well, actually, though, it doesn't hurt to have Ramsey in a
Oh,
book
it
like
certainly
this.
doesn't.
He is such a gent, as Dave says, and he's been very
Wonderful. He's
supportive of
wonderful.
our work. And he brought this very original story, as Dave says, based on his lived experience. In fact, Ramsey says one of the things about his childhood and the way he coped with his mother's mental illness
Hmm.
means that he has so much to mine in horror. And he says he uses that experience a great deal in his work. So you'll see it in other stories.
Mm.
But also this whole idea for me, this particular story that he sent us, that the person with the mental illness, sometimes there's an element of awareness, and in this one there is just none. And I just love that, and you imagine being that child trying to, not knowing what's normal. How do you know what's normal as a child? Because that is your experience when you're growing up. You think that's normal. And so, and the way he brought this particular character who has no awareness really of their psychosis was particularly chilling. And of course, it's Ramsey's style. His style is very is very unique, of course, and
Hmm.
that kind of chatty sort of style, almost that
Yes.
everyman sort of style.
Hmm.
And so, of course, that will resonate for so many people. So we're very excited to have just, particularly in this year when he's got a new novel out as well. So we're a bit lucky to have him.
Yeah, and just the way that, in the author's note that he says he's been writing, in different ways about mental illness for 50 years now. It's like this anthology was for him, he had to be there for sure. So I love that. So just to sort of, wind down here, you talked a little bit about it, but I just want to know, this is a great resource, as you said, for writers. What are you hoping readers get out of this anthology as they're beginning to, be able to get it?
I
He's
think
like asking the really hard questions at the end here. I mean, I think it's a great. No, it's not. It's not like it was hard, but it's an emotionally packed book. So it's like, what are you hoping it can get? It's a big question. It's a serious question, and it's a good one.
Yeah, I think it goes to the heart
Yeah,
of why it
it
exists,
is.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess from my perspective, um, I hope that people, first and foremost, I hope it's a book hopefully that will entertain people, but
Hmm.
also educate people. I think it's having that balance. It's being able to and getting people to think about what's going on within the stories themselves, within the context of, I guess, the lived experience of mental illness or the lived experience of mental health issues. And whether that relates from their own experiences and that they're looking at a story and then they can kind of identify with what's going on with that, which would be a fascinating dynamic.
Hmm.
Um, but also coming away, thinking about the book, but in a kind of sense where the whole kind of experience for them is a positive one. We want this to be a positive experience, irrespective of, we know there's lots of challenging stories in there, and they certainly present a lot of a very wide ranging set of horrific, scary, creepy, nuanced fiction. But we also want them to have a sense of, positivity from it, because one of the things around mental health recovery is having that concept of feeling hopeful, being hopeful of the future. So we're hoping that people will come away from the book with that sense of positivity and saying, even at the end, they close the book cover and saying, I really enjoyed that. They
Hmm.
may not even know. They may not know why they enjoyed it, but as long as they get that sense of positivity from it, then I guess for me that would be a big tick in the box.
Love that.
Yeah, that's really well said, Dave. I think I agree with Dave entirely, and I hope people think this is just a really good read.
Mm.
So an entertaining book, one that educates, as Dave says, maybe enlighten as well, because there are things here that you just might not have understood or realized. So that sort of that understanding or even that solace, that understanding that, oh, I get this, but also, oh, they get me. They get me. This is my experience. I know what they're saying here. And that's helpful if you are in a place and you can say, here's a story that gets me. This is a story that shows my experience in some way. I mean, I hope also that it sort of gets people talking like this, because
Absolutely.
traditionally mental health has just been swept under the carpet. It's not talked about. The stigma is just not discussed. I know I've told this story before to Dave, but my dad had a sister who was autistic, and back, he was born in the 30s, and so it was just not discussed. It was just you didn't talk about those kinds of things, and those people, the whole woman in the attic thing, that happened. And it just bring these things out into the open. Here we are having a dialogue about it. Now, would this dialogue have happened 50 years ago when, or when Ramsey was a boy, for example, would this conversation that we're having now have happened? And I just think, bringing these things to the light and being able to talk about them openly and to not be stigmatized, that would be, for me, that would just be a huge win, just to be able to talk like adults in an open way. And these people are not broken, they're just different and they're struggling. And how can we see them and acknowledge what they're experiencing so that there's some element of solace and, as Dave said, most importantly, hope.
Beautifully said. Yeah, both of you. I think that I've read a lot of anthologies, and I think that this is one that I can truly say every author, every story brings their A game. There is no filler in this anthology whatsoever. And that makes sense considering, the quality of authors that were submitting and the number that were submitted. But this is definitely, if you're going to get one this
Mm-hmm.
year, this is one, not to mention the fact that aesthetically, it is a beautiful book.
Well, it just seems like,
Gorgeous.
It is
just listening to some of the things you've said, Adam, it's like the years that this writer has written, the thoughtfulness with which the two of you curated this. I mean, that to me makes this feel like I can't wait to physically have it in my hands
Mhm.
because it feels like one of those books that I'm going to feel like I just want to give it a hug already because it's so special.
Just wait till you see it.
I know, but it's like it's so special, right?
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean,
And
it's
yeah.
unique in what it's doing. It's unique in who's all involved
Mhm.
and the thoughtfulness behind it. So, yeah, I'm really excited for that.
But definitely, like, it's a book that is not just an anthology and, you read it cover to cover, but it is one that I think that writers and other people will pick up again as they think about specific stories and kind of want to look at that again and revisit. So,
And just to revisit your point on how the authors get to share a little bit about why they wrote. I mean, every time I get that at the end of a book, it's the very best thing. It
Mhm.
just rounds it out completely. So, I mean, it just feels like a whole work of art
Yeah.
that will sit on our shelves that will be like, have you gotten this? Have you read
Mhm.
this? Like
Yeah,
when people come over and
Aw.
look at the library,
for
like this will
sure.
be a book that you pull out and be like, you need to get
Yep,
this.
absolutely.
Wow.
Definitely feel that way. And I hope it's
Thank you for
y-
saying that. That makes us feel pretty special, doesn't it, Dave?
It's true
I
though.
mean, if everyone feels that way, then I think we will have succeeded. So I just feel that makes me feel very happy.
Well, that's the goal for us is to make everyone feel like that because like I've said before, when I go to book events and you speak to the author and you talk to them and they're like, which book do you want to buy? It's hard for me to say just this one book because I respect the hell out of what they've done so much. And just knowing all the works that have gone into this, the intention as well as the impact that this will have is so, and Adam, it's like anytime, like, where is he? He's in front of the library, touching his books, rearranging them. And it's like, but we do, when people come over, it's like, oh, have you seen this? Have you gotten this? And it's like, I know that's just already from what we've discussed. It's just going to be that way.
yes, and I definitely hope it's incredibly successful. Hopefully you are able to do multiple volumes of this because I'm sure you have so much to mine from for it. But do you have anything, either of you individually or together, on the horizon that you can or want to talk about as well?
Dave's got so much coming, it's not funny, doesn't every day's a new release at the moment, so you fire away, Dave.
Oh gosh, I've got a new book called False Prophet coming out
Mhm.
on the 3rd of October with Erie River Publishing, and that's a kind of psychological horror. Then I've got a collection coming out next year with Horrorsmith Publishing called Screams and Whispers, which is a collection of short stories. And then I've got something that I can't talk about. It is going to be another anthology, but I haven't signed contracts yet, so I'm not formally allowed to say. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, haven't got so much coming this year. I have a few short stories and things because I've been reading for World Fantasy. I've been the judge for World Fantasy this year and a number of other very big judging projects. I have a feminist poetry collection coming, a collaborative collection with Karina Bissett coming from Running Wild Press in March of next year. So I'm very excited about that one. And some other stuff I can't talk about. I've been in some film talks. So, and the film talks they're just talks, and you never know if they're going to go anywhere. And sometimes they take years. So I'm saying this and it could be nothing and it could be something and you just never know. So it's hard not to be excited about those.
Well, I've
Absolutely.
come to know that when there's stuff that you can't talk about, that's usually a good sign for people. So I'm excited, and I'm excited for people to get hands on this anthology here in the US, and we'll definitely be pushing it as much as possible to get it in the hands of people. And this was an absolute delight. I feel like we could have talked for another hour or so, but thank you so much. I'm going to thank Alma over and over again for connecting us because I really think this was a vital and wonderful conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
It's been
thank you for
wonderful.
having
Thank
us. It's
you.
been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yep. Have a great rest of your day, and Monday, Sunday, whatever day you're on, I hope it's a great one.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye bye.